Hi, I'm Victor Vogel. I am a leadership communication consultant by trade. Uh, Lately, I've been just doing a lot of research in the area of leadership, the problem that organizations have connecting with their employees today, which is a major problem for just about every organization that's out there. Not all of them, but quite a few. And so my objective is to try to figure a way to help organizations reimagine themselves, and consequently, you need to reimagine your leadership within the organization, because that leadership is the glue that binds the organization together, that allows things to happen the way you would like them to happen. And one of the things that gets in the way of that is the training development or leadership and development industry now. Much of that back in the 40s and 50s was done inside the organization through the human resources department or the training department or whatever department they had that handled that type of thing. Now, today, we have, that's basically corporations decided that was possibly, it was considered an expense, not an investment. Okay, so it's on the expense side of the ledger sheet in the finance world. So the executives in the finance world would be trying to push that away from the organization, and to possibly find ways to do that for less money or less interruption with what they perceived were the asset sides of that, which was generating the revenue from the products that were, or the service that was delivered. And it was looked at as hiring and training specific skill sets like leadership skills in themselves were considered a nicety, something that'd be great if you had it. But, you know, we'll spend a little money training you on it. We're not going to spend a lot, because the net effect is your job as a leader is to get that product or service delivered through your people. And so consequently, that generated an industry of people who wanted to offer those services. They saw companies were trying to do this. They felt the need from the companies, so they started putting together those programs that would do that kind of stuff. We would find people for you, and then all you had to do was the last interview. We would do all the screening, all the background checks, all that kind of, that became a major industry. Executive search or search firms became a major industry out there. Big, huge one in Oklahoma City where I live. That area anyway. So, but there were many more, and then that became even more specialized. I mean, you had little firms that were hiring temporary help and secretarial, administrative, those kinds of jobs, or labor-oriented jobs. Unions were involved in that part of that issue of providing those services of finding the people to do particular union job work. But then you also had that industry of finding people kind of divided into even different phases, where you had executive search firms, and then there was the middle manager and employee search firms, and the executive search firms are specialized on senior leadership areas, higher salaried areas. And then that began to become computerized. It was done by people, but then the internet came along and computers came along, and we began to find out ways to interview people using the systems, because we were saying, okay, when you were sitting down talking to somebody, what was the interviewer really looking for? Well, they were keying in on keywords. The same thing you do with SEO, so to speak, and there were certain keywords or phrases that if somebody said, that's kind of what you were looking for, or you were listening for, and if you heard those, you were and you liked what you heard about those keywords, then that person was somebody who you'd be interested in. So we basically said, well, if we can find those keyword phrases in the resume premise, then we can begin to filter down a larger group of people down to a narrow group of people simply through keywords and that environment where we began to narrow particular prospects. So you could be, now if you're thinking yourself as someone who's employed, you thought, well, I don't write a good resume, but if I can get in front of you, I can convince you I'm a good employee. You're pretty much out of luck today, because if your keywords or your resume is not written correctly, then you're pretty much scanned out. You don't get a chance to sit down in front of somebody and talk to them and show them what you can really do outside of that resume. So that industry in itself was very phenomenal, but there's also the training and the leadership development industry. And believe it or not, we spend probably about, on average, $160 billion a year. And it may be more than that now, since I last checked, that was a few years ago. We're spending that kind of money developing leaders. So there's that whole industry of consulting and culture change and leadership development and strategic change and supply chain management, and then those consulting industries began to splinter into specialized consulting firms for accounting, for supply chain, for HR, for leadership, for culture change. You had a whole variety of these industries pop up, and as they popped up, the bigger industries began to gobble them up and put them into functional areas. So you might have McKinsey, who has massive consulting firm with a variety of different consultants within that firm. So that whole industry is out there. Then you had people like the Center for Creative Leadership and a bunch of others who specialize, for example, in just leadership development. And they had almost institutionalized from an educational perspective leadership. So you had these courses and these programs that people could go to. And then you had other firms who were putting together assessments like human synergistics and the DISC profiles and a bunch of these others. There's a bunch of those out there. All of this evolved out of outsourcing leadership development and leadership. All of this used to be done internally in an organization. So you kind of had as an employee, if you think about it back in the 1950s and early 60s, maybe even early 70s, you had a career, you knew what the career path levels were by functional areas. You know, you had the supervisor, manager, director, VP. Those were career level jumps that you knew what it took to get there. You could be working your way up through the ranks to get there. And you could then do what you needed to do and learn what you needed to learn to become a vice president or a director or a manager or whatever it might be. That was all we looked at people within. You didn't have to worry about culture so much because you had your culture established and you were bringing people up through the culture. So as you change the culture a little bit for whatever reason, the people you were looking at for promotion and development were those people within the organization who already knew your culture. They were established in that environment. Today, that's not the case. We might find an executive, CFO or CEO or chief CHO, chief human resource officer, chief IT and technology person, who you solicit from outside groups. You have headhunters looking for them, so to speak, and they bring in people. And so you might fill that, several of those mid-level to higher executive leadership roles with someone from outside of the organization who has experience. And that was being sold as, we're going to bring in new blood, new ideas, new approaches to things, which technically speaking, from a leadership side, there's not a lot of newness to leadership, folks. There's not a lot of different approaches to leadership. Leadership is pretty much a solid one-on-one relationship between you and your people. And there's not a lot of things that you can change about that don't already exist that you can change about that leadership dynamic. So if you were looking for that difference in change, you might be looking for the functional aspects of leadership. In other words, I knew a little more about accounting or finance, then maybe I was doing things differently or had different approach to finance than you might have over here. That functional responsibility could be a variance, that could be a difference. But from a leadership perspective, there's not much that one leader can do that's different than another leader. That leadership within that organization couldn't do and change within the organization. So it is an interesting dilemma, but it is a dilemma that at the time sounded good, because what companies were doing is they weren't thinking about their relationship as an organization consisting of a bunch of people trying to relate within the organization as a whole. They were thinking about, how can I save money finding people that have pretty good functional skill sets or can bring a new functional skills aspect to the function. So that's what they were looking for with these, and people were providing those, and they were available out there. But from the leadership perspective, what I found happen in a lot of these organizations, and where I ended up helping people change some of this as a consultant, was when you go in, this person brings in a new aspect. So we have change, and we know that's going to cause some resistance. And the issue of whether that resistance was overcome effectively centered in the leadership capability of that new person, not the functional knowledge skill set. So you bring in a chief financial officer, and he's going to shake things up in the finance department. His leadership skill is going to be the determining factor whether that shakeup is successful or not, or whether it causes more havoc than helps. So what we found was, or what I found was, over the years, and I look back at my consulting, a lot of what I did was come back in and take a look at what was happening between leadership and the people. Because The net effect is the chief financial officer cannot get all of the finance stuff done. They're not a miracle worker. Now, they may be thinking they can do that with AI today, but I don't think you're going to find that's the case either. So you may find some efficiencies in there, but I don't think you're going to change the idea that you as a chief financial officer are going to be relating to actual people doing the job. You're going to find, I think, that you find some efficiencies in certain areas, but other things are going to be extremely difficult to process in outside of a personal relationship with your employees. A leadership role. Your leadership isn't going to change that much. So the dilemma here becomes these industries, they like I said, $160 billion on just leadership development. Now think about the consulting side of that, the other things that we do, like building cultural change. Like I had one total corporate culture project where we're working on connecting the corporate offices to the operation environment and building that relationship, that culture change. Was a $25 million project for this international corporation. $25 million. Myself, I think there were 4 people on my team, and then we had multiple other consultants that were what we call the functional consultants, where they specialized in finance or communications or marketing or whatever it was. And we had those consultants building the systems that they needed to create a certain culture that was able to connect the marketing department of corporate to an operational environment. So I oversaw probably it's actually 5 other major consulting firms and their employees in that. I guided that process along with my people who were overseeing the overall cultural interface part of that. $25 million project, something like 3 years of work in that area. So what I'm saying is you're having people who have an industry in that. The question becomes, is that changing anything for the organizations? Now, it made a difference in this one corporation, but we weren't really getting that corporation established for a long-term sustainability existence. This was really a project to improve the overall value and image of the corporation so it could be marketed and sold. Okay, so it wasn't even a long-term project. It was to get it ready and that image pops in there and they could get the right deal cut to sell that company off. The idea here I'm trying to point out is we have those industries who are, once they get a particular model established or once they get something set up, they don't like changing it because that costs them money and it requires them to restructure internally within themselves to change, etc. So once they have something in there, they like to come in and sell that and say that works consistently for everything that you would need to want to change within your organization too. So just let us implement this in there. And it's not very customized. It's very almost cookie cutter approach to things. There's a lot of those companies out there. DISC will tell you it's the best profile measurement of leadership. Human Synergistics will tell you it's best. That's the one I tended to use the most. I found to be the best, but it wasn't the only one I used. I mean, it didn't fit all needs that I had to have As a consultant, as an independent consultant, I had the flexibility to decide what was right for the client. So I didn't have to sell particular consulting firms' product, so to speak. I could look at the client and say, hey, this fits it, or parts of this fit this, so let's take this part and use it for that, and let's go get another thing and use it for this. That's kind of how I operated as a consultant. It was very effective in getting things done. The key here is when you have large consulting firms like that, now we're in an environment where AI is there. So these consulting firms, I'm coming back to what I was doing. I created something called the Interpersonal Communication Leadership Assessment. It is a interpersonal communication assessment, how effective leaders are at interpersonal communication. Now, there's a lot you have to do when you build an assessment like that to decide what behaviors you're going to measure and then how you're going to represent those behaviors in a statement or a question. And then you run those through a series of statistics, and the statistics will kind of guide you as to which questions seem to be okay. Like there was a whole section I asked about communication that just, the questions they weren't very valid, they weren't very reliable, they didn't make sense the way I think. So I had to take those out of the assessment altogether. And see where I could use other questions that were reliable to relate to that particular area. So once you do that, then you have these statistical analysis you run on these. Now, in my PhD program, I was learning the statistics, and you would have to take the spreadsheet and sum the columns, find out that area, apply the statistical variation formula to it, look at that, see whether it was in the ranges that it should be, that was considered acceptable, and what that meant. That was analysis, what that meant. You knew what you were doing because you knew how to do the formula. You learned the statistics and the concept of statistics and the formula and what not to do and to do so that it's valid, and you can kind of believe that what you're seeing is what you're really seeing. So today I can take that same spreadsheet of numbers and go into ChatGPT and say, run the major statistical analysis for reliability and validity of all these questions, and then tell me the questions that are less likely to be effective for this assessment. Here's what I want out of the assessment. And within a minute or two, all those statistics are run. And there's a report showing which questions didn't stand the test. They needed to be weeded out. And why? To what level they didn't meet. I could justify. They ran the whole statistical thing. This would have taken me weeks to do. I had them in less than a couple of minutes. So that's what's going on out here right now. You've got major corporations who do those statistical work. They were businesses built around creating those assessments. Now I can create my own assessment out here, have ChatGPT do all the statistics. I can look at them. I have to kind of make sure I agree with what the AI program said, but I haven't found when it comes to stuff like that, they're fairly accurate. They're fairly accurate, to be honest with you. So I felt comfortable with that. I can take that section out of the assessment now altogether, and these other questions that were, anyway, I worked it from 80 probably down to 35 or 40 questions now. And I feel much more comfortable that level, being able to disseminate that to the people from leader, and having their people complete that assessment and aggregate that data. And it also created the form to do it with, and the processes for collecting it and evaluating it. I can probably sit down with ChatGPT and feed it the prompts to say, if there's a range of this numbers, provide me a development analysis summary that I can put into a report that can be delivered immediately after them completing that summary. And if I look at that, I'm going to be able to tell whether ChatGPT was pretty much on the money in giving me that summary. So if you scored this, you'd get this summary. If you scored this, you'd get a different summary. And each of those would be appropriately correct summary for the score that was representative for the variables we were looking at. Now I can do all that now with ChatGPT. Now industries are going, I don't need to go out and get a consulting firm to do that for me. I don't need statisticians to do that for me. So that is a change that's happening. And what I'm trying to tell people who are creating marketing, social media programs or whatever, that's going on right now. I remember that happening in the dot-com era in the middle 1990s. People were making money hand over fist over creating these small companies as individuals and getting other people. It's almost like a pyramid effect, but not quite a pyramid. But, one person was doing a lot of stuff, and they were just telling other people, join me in this, and you'll make a lot of money too. And they were, and the way it was established, they were getting a percentage of whatever somebody else made. So the more people I brought into that program, the more money I made, and the less I had to do. That blew up in 2000 something, and all those companies began to fail because there were bigger corporations who created things that basically eliminated that process, that those services that were being created. And that's what happens. Somebody comes up with an idea that oversees all this other stuff. Now, we just happen to have AI, which is a massive informational generational change, and that is changing a whole lot of stuff. One of the things that hasn't quite grasped yet, in my mind, is that relationship between the leader and the role of leadership in an organization. So that's where I am right now in my research from that side of things, is we need to change the leadership paradigm, because there's so much changing about people that you are leading and the way they have to relate to organizations. And organizations are still using what I call a stochastic, a stiff, consistently functionally oriented role-based model for leadership that we've used for 40 or 50 years I've been in the business. And we are losing our community, our sense of connectivity and relationships between the various levels in the organization, between leaders and their people, between the employees in the marketing department and the employees in the accounting department and the HR department and the finance department, that connectivity, that sense of community where that organization is operating and hums well because everybody is connected and impacted by what everybody else does, and they're connected in a way that that information sharing makes them a small community, and they get the chance to share information openly and transparently, and consequently things go well. Versus what we have been trying to do for the last 40 or 50 years and been very efficient at separating a lot of that. So you have a marketing department that spends very little time talking with the accounting department. Or maybe and I'm talking about not just the leadership. Now the leadership might meet in a meeting, but I'm talking about the employees, the people who do the work, who get excited about doing the work, who feel a sense of value for the work they're doing as being perceived by leadership. That's kind of eroding. And I found out it really is around the fact that we spend no time training people about how to communicate effectively. Whether it's one person on one person, whether it's one person on many people, whether it's a leader and a department of his people, or their department and another department, or the whole group, the whole organization as a whole. Who are they? What are they about? So what Renaissance Leadership Odyssey is about is it's about changing how we're thinking about those things. So if you are someone who is being sucked in with I don't want to use the word sucked in, that's probably not a good way to put it. If you're if you feel that sense of excitement coming from marketing, social media marketing people who are showing you lines where they're making $20,000 this month and $50,000, and it's increasing every month. They're going to be millionaires soon, and they're like in their early 20s, and it's just them. They don't have large groups of employees doing anything. So that's one model that's out there. But I'm also telling you, you can go to ChatGPT and ask the question, and you don't need any of those people that are providing those ads. ChatGPT will give you the plan on how to do that on TikTok, or how to do that on YouTube, or how to do that on Facebook. The same way it gave me my statistical reports. It can tell you that. It has all of that information in its learning environment now. So those people are really not necessary for you to be successful if you understand how to ask the right questions to AI. And that's the power AI has, which in itself should scare you and should begin to ask you questions. Do we want something to have that much capability that we really don't have to worry about interpersonal relationships with? In other words, we lose our community with that. We can very easily lose our community. We don't have to, but unless we discuss that, unless we bring it to the front, unless we understand the dynamic, in other words, we ask that question I talked about earlier, what one kind of thing can screw this all up? What can mess it all up for you? ChatGPT might be one of those things. You need to say, well, how can AI screw everything up for this organization? What can get in the way of it? We're not doing that as much because we're discovering, hey, look, I can have the form, I can have the statistics, I can have the reports, I can have the summaries, I can have all this done in a couple of hours of just chatting with AI, prompting it correctly. And they write the report, they put it into whether it's Google or whether it's Excel spreadsheet or whatever it is. I can tell it where I want it to be working. Like I used a lot of Google, they created all the Google forms for me. They wrote the code. I put it into Google and it's on my internet. It's on my website, ready to go when I'm ready to go. So there are a bunch of people on LinkedIn and other people who kept contacting me and saying, hey, look, we can do this, we can do this. And I'm going, I just had AI to do the same thing. I asked them that question. I'm sure the same question you're going to ask me, I ask AI. They now delivered that, and they delivered they delivered all the code to put into my website on my Google site that really works on Google's site, and I have a brand new look to my website that I didn't have before, that's more focused, that has all the SEO stuff in it, and that's what I asked it, and it just generated it for me. I don't need that person now. And by the way, they did that for free. At this point, they did it for free. Now that's a service to people as long as it's free. What's happening is now try to do that with ChatGPT 5, and they want you to upgrade to the premium product. Now, all of a sudden, you've got that and Canva and CapCut, and the next thing you know, you're spending $100 a month on subscription fees. See, so that's how that's working in the business. So subscription, from a TikTok perspective, maybe subscription would be the most futuristic way to look at it if you're going to try to counter AI. But I'm not even sure that's going to work down the road. If AI can do everything else for a lot less money, if it can consolidate all of those subscriptions right now, I think that the thing that Canva is going to have to worry about is whether AI can fold in the whole image creation thing that Canva's doing. In other words, it's almost, I begin to wonder at what point Canva is now going to be bought and folded into one big AI thing that's going to cover all of the aspects of that you can think about. Thumbnails, images, videos, video editing, all CapCut goes away, or CapCut becomes the massive aspect. You see Canva folding into CapCut. So that's what's going on, and so we then begin to see all these independent companies begin to be gobbled up and put into a central company. That's what happened with social media. That's what happened with Twitter. That's what's happened with Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp and all that. That's the general trend of what we call capitalism. And it leaves out the impact on people. That's the dilemma. We're not too concerned about the impact on people. So I don't want to go much further than this, but I'm going to be putting on TikTok my books for sale. They're on terms of communication. You're going to find people are becoming less effective at communicating with each other as this science begins to consolidate and to become more powerful. There's going to be less need to talk with other people. And we're going to lose that. It's something that is part of who we are as humans. We're going to begin to start to lose that if we don't somehow put that into the effort of working with ChatGPT. I can use that to create my surveys. I can use that to create my summaries. In other words, that does a lot of administrative stuff. It will never replace, in my mind right now, it doesn't have the capacity to replace my ability to sit down with you and talk with you face to face and get the emotions and get the representation of who you are and where you're coming from. That is something that only humans can do with humans. ChatGPT or robots have not even come close to that arena yet. They're saying they want to strive for it. One, I don't know we should let them to do that. That's one of the questions we need to be asking out there before we start going down the path, so to speak. The second thing is, I'm not sure they can get to that point. I'm not sure they can get to that point. But we're learning more and more about the brain, so there's always a possibility. But right now, over the next 2 decades or so, there's no question in my mind, this trait of human interaction is going to be the point-counterpoint scenario that businesses are going to be dealing with more than anything else, because they're losing their capacity and their sensitivity how to connect effectively with others. And they're not trained in it. We're not training people in it. And so consequently, that's a problem. One of the things you can do as an organization is you can begin to minimize that outsourcing, or maybe even eliminate it altogether, and bring all this back, at least from the leadership perspective. Bring your ability to identify, develop, and select and place your leadership internally within the organization. Keep it confined within your organization. Don't go outside to do that. Build that within the structure and make sure the senior executives control that process. That's how important it is to the organization. That's what Renaissance Leadership's book in those 27 pages goes into: why you need to do that, how you need to do that, the processes that leaders need to master in order to be effective as leaders in the future, so they don't get, so AI doesn't override people's ability to keep the humanity in the organization, the community in that organization. So these books I've written, Renaissance Leadership Management, there's one about small business and interpersonal communication, one about navigating conversations, where I say emotional intelligence intersects with interpersonal communication. Very powerful processes, 2 very powerful processes. It truly is the best definition of interpersonal communication. There's 2 processes there. They operate together, and when they operate together, they are extremely powerful. When you lose one, you disproportionately lose the effectiveness to do the other one effectively. In other words, if you're real good at communication processes, but not very good at interrelationships, your communication sucks really bad. Same way, if you're really good at interrelationships, but you're not very good at communication processes, your communication interpersonally sucks. So, and it's not like if it's 50-50. It's like you lose one, it's like 80% from both sides of the house go down the tubes. So it's just not, it's how important it is to master both of those and integrate them effectively. That's how powerful that can be. And you're seeing it today in our government in the United States and around the world. You're seeing the lack of it. The lack of it. It's a master class in not having effective interpersonal communication relationships. It's just a master class. You can watch it and just see it go crazy, and the results of what happens when it's not there. So this is a fairly long post, but it's a fairly important post. You can begin by going to the shop and go to the book section and find Victor L. Vogel's books on interpersonal communications and the Renaissance Leadership Odyssey. And read the books. First, just read them all the way. They're all ebooks, and they've got links in them where you can stop what you're reading and go look at some. Like one of the things I recommend is positive intelligence, and you're reading about that, and then you come to that link, just stop. Stop reading my book, click on that link, and go learn all you can learn about positive intelligence. Then you can come back and finish out the rest of my book. But you can read the book all the way through first, come back and then study it chapter by chapter. And after you read it a couple of times, you go through it 2 or 3 times, you're going to gain something new every time that you're sensing you need to cope with and deal with and learn about. And then it's going to give you the resources about how to get that done. Like as a communication process, we're going to be doing my Renaissance Communication and Leadership Odyssey course. It's a 17-week module, self-directed course that I'm finishing up some of the videos on them now. Hopefully the first year that's going to be available, and you can just sign up and take that course. Now, all of these are not cheap, okay? These are teaching you skills that are going to really enhance your capacity to lead, if that is where you're going to be in your life. It's an investment you're going to make in who you are as a leader. And these 3 areas, these 3 pillars you have to master, each one of them are running somewhere between $800 to $1,200 each. So you're going to be spending somewhere in the neighborhood of $3,000 to $3,800, something like that, for those 3 programs. But they are going there, and they don't happen like in a day or two. They're like weeks, and so 17 weeks is almost 3 months, and some of them are 6 months long, and some of them are a year long. And in the scheme of things, if you really stretch it out and make it work for you. But they all provide you. I mean, if you're developing internally in a company, you're going to be spending years developing as a leader. That's why I'm trying to get people to take that back inside. You start down here and you got this job, and you go to, you go 4 years of college, and while you're in 4 years in college, you're getting that development inside the company, and then you get your promotion to your next level, which is manager, and there's certain things you learn and grow in relative to that manager role, and then the next step up might be the director role, and you step into that director role, and that's a different kind of responsibility, different focus, but all the things you learn down here keep building on each other over the course of 2, 3, 5 years of your career. Now, if you're hopping from company to company to company, you're changing cultures, you're changing roles, all these things are different. And that's why companies need to focus on retaining quality talent and bringing them up within the organization, and stop outsourcing this stuff. Stop trying to put people into the organization that aren't connected as a community to that organization. So I'm interested in social media providing me some interaction with other people, like TikTok people, who are the next generation, the Generation Z, and whatever comes after Z. I don't know what that would be. But those needs are critical for business owners of the future to understand. What's going on in your mind? What is it you sense you need as an employee? If you were gonna, what would excite you and keep you within this organization if I hired you? That's what I need from you. And don't just say freedom. You better be able to explain really what you're saying about that, and have you thought it through thoroughly. And that's one of the dilemmas that might be happening with the younger generation, is they might not be thinking past the immediacy of where they are. There's what would happen if this changed? So these critical thinking processes are things that are not necessarily things like AI, and that can disrupt your critical thinking processes because AI is doing that thinking for you. And that doesn't then help you develop the skill of learning how to do that. So just some points for you to be considering. Read these books. Get in touch with me if you have questions and want to have discussions. We can talk about it. I don't care if you disagree with me or if you agree with me. It doesn't make any difference. I love the conversations. It's how I grow. I'm continuing to grow at 79. I'm learning something new every single day. You have a good day.